History of the Beatles, go. The Beatles were a band from Liverpool formed in 1960 which started off with John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best. Stuart left the group to be an artist and Pete got kicked off the group for an unknown reason and replaced by Ringo Starr, a drummer with a really big nose. John said Ringo wasn't even a good drummer. Paul didn't want to be a bassist but had to after Stuart left the group. They were inspired by 50s rock music and wanted to follow their dreams of becoming really famous, other than Pete and Stuart, who said bye before the Beatles released their first album. After this lineup of Beatles, John, Paul, George and Ringo, the Beatles grew faster than any other band at the time. They were so important that films and cartoons were made about the Beatles. The Beatles were so important that they held the most famous show of all time, the time they played on top of the Apple building. The band really kicked off after the release of Sgt. Pepper in June 1967. The album was so different that it sounded like a completely different style of music, but was still sounded like the Beatles. Sgt. Pepper started off on the theories that Paul McCartney was dead, which is wrong by the way. Paul isn't dead. Then Abbey Road came out 2 years later after Sgt. Pepper, in my opinion one of the best albums they released. This album also had a reference to the Paul is dead theory again, this time Paul's barefoot death in the cover of Abbey Road. The Beatles split up after someone's girlfriend ripped apart the most remembered band today. John had a rather popular solo career before being shot in 1980, calmer for saying Ringo's a bad drummer in my opinion. George Harrison had a bad solo career before dying of cancer in 2001. Paul is still hosting shows today and Ringo, people don't really talk about him anymore, but he still has a rather large nose.